Well, we kick off the new year a lot like we ended 2019, that with Nancy Pelosi sitting on the articles of impeachment instead of sending them over to the Senate. The House Speaker, she wants what she calls a fair trial, that with witnesses, but Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, doesn't like the idea. However, there is a major development regarding one of the key people the Democrats want to hear from. I'm talking about former National Security Advisor John Bolton. He was mentioned several times during testimony in the House side, including when former White House advisor Fiona Hill quoted Bolton.
I am not part of this whatever drug deal that Mulvaney and Sondland are cooking up.
What did you understand him to mean by the drug deal that Mulvaney and Sondland were cooking up?
I took it to mean investigations for a meeting.
Bolton also warned about Rudy Giuliani, when Bolton reportedly said that Rudy was a, quote, hand grenade who's going to blow everybody up. We also have new information on the Ukraine scandal as it relates to the president's involvement. Reportedly, as we've learned here, Trump was pulling the strings on withholding the aid. Here's Chuck Schumer explaining the situation and why this provides more fodder for Democrats who want to call witnesses.
There was a new report about a trove of newly unredacted emails that further exposed the serious concerns raised by Trump administration officials about the propriety and legality of the president's decision to delay military assistance to Ukraine. One of those emails were released yesterday was from Michael Duffy, one of the witnesses we've requested, to the Pentagon controller, and it read, quote, clear direction from POTUS, the president, to continue the hold. What constituted clear direction? These are questions that can only be answered by examination of the documentary evidence and by the testimony of key Trump administration officials under oath in a Senate trial.
For more on that, let's bring in our next guest, good friend to the program, former federal prosecutor Joseph Moreno. And Joe, before you even start, I know evidence, reason, they're taking a backseat right now. We're purely in the world of politics, with the Capitol behind you obviously being center stage. That said, aren't we really talking about 5 people? If they can get a handful of Republicans to basically say in the Senate, yeah, we ought to hear from witnesses in the trial. You got some vulnerable Republicans that are up for re-election. I'm thinking of a certain woman in Maine here, and also other Republicans not as beholden to the president, like Romney out in Utah and a few others. If they say, this thing, I'm not going to be part of a show trial, let's actually see something here, that's the only way this really matters with Bolton?
Richard, I think so. I mean, there's not a lot that the American public seem to agree on these days, but I have to think that the basic concept of fairness is one of those few things. And I think if you poll Americans, regardless of whether they are pro or anti-President Trump, and you say, look, it's a basic concept of our system that a trial is fair, and part of that fairness means seeing the evidence, I think you might just pick off those 4 Republicans that you need to get the votes to force witnesses. So I think that while people may be skeptical of the case against President Trump, if you are inclined to support him, I do think there is this thirst. There is this interest by the American public and hopefully by some Republicans in the Senate to say, look, regardless of what the evidence ultimately concludes, we need to see it in order to get to that conclusion. So hopefully that prevails.
Now I'm going to save the audience the time of playing the Lindsey Graham sound from during the Clinton impeachment, where he was all about transparency, hearing from witnesses, taking time with the process, etc. That was the then Lindsey to the now South Carolina senator. To that end, he said, screw it. Let's just forget about the articles ever coming up. Let's hold the trial without it. From a raw political nation, I understand the premise that he's going for. Forget that it's not, I think, in America's best interest, beside the point. But doesn't he run a risk in other Republicans too? Bolton's book's going to come out. We're going to hear more things. It's just the nature of Washington between now and the election. And if they railroad this thing through while other people end up, whether it be through pushing their own books here, doing interviews, testimony that'll come out through something else that we learned after the fact that was real evidence that the public never got to hear and senators never got to hear before voting on. doesn't that constitute a political risk, let alone political malpractice?
I would say it's certainly a highly risky strategy, right? Republicans can't really have it both ways. If Lindsey Graham is prepared to sort of change Senate rules to say, we don't need the House to deliver the articles, we can just take them ourselves, then I think he's really taking on the burden of saying, well, look, if you're going to do that, don't you think you should do it right? And that means viewing documents, calling witnesses, and hearing what the evidence is.
You know, Joe, I'm sure there's some people in our audience who, while they may not have liked what the president has done, they may not believe it reaches the level of a high crime and a misdemeanor to remove him from office. But for a person like you, who spent a lot of your adult life here, taking oaths here, swearing to uphold the law, looking out for the best interests of the nation here, the premise that you always assumed that there were checks and balances, there were co-equal branches of government, that no one person was above the law completely, even a president of the United States. What do you worry about more than whether he's convicted or not in the Senate? That there'll be precedents set after this that would have our founding fathers spinning in their graves.
Richard, I think you're right. I do think that reasonable people can disagree on whether this rises to an impeachable or removal level of offense. And I don't cast aspersions on people on either side, because I think people of good faith can disagree on that point. What bothers me more than the immediate case of what happened between President Trump and President Zelensky is the inability of Congress to get the evidence. That bothers me. And I think the Democrats did make a misstep strategically in not pursuing subpoenas in the House before they voted on impeachment, because it undercuts their ability to argue for it now. If it's so critical to subpoena John Bolton in the Senate, why didn't they do it in the House? That being said, we can still fix it, right? There is still a process for getting this information. That means either the House can still do it, or it can be done by the Senate.
All right, Joe, I'm going to ask you to first guess this. What do you think the format of this trial is going to look like? Will we see real witnesses here? Will it be kind of, you give me two, I give you two? How does this play out?
First off, I think there is a very good chance we see a motion to dismiss outright before any trial even begins. We did see that in the trial of President Bill Clinton back in 1998. It was not successful. The Republican majority voted it down, but that's a possibility. And we have heard murmurings from some Republicans they may do that. Now, let's say it doesn't happen or it doesn't succeed. Then I think you'll see a very, very truncated Senate trial. I think you'll hear arguments from the House managers, basically the prosecutors that are going to be Democrats. I think you're going to see the introduction of transcripts from witnesses we've already heard from, either in open testimony or closed testimony in the House. And then you're going to see further efforts by Republicans in the Senate to basically close the case. So I think in either scenario, we don't get to live witnesses. And I think unless the dynamics change considerably, it will not be a trial in the sense that most Americans think of a criminal trial. It will be the presentation of evidence we've largely heard, voted on by senators who have largely already projected what their vote is going to be.
So you can probably put away the popcorn, everybody. It's not going to be the Watergate hearings 2.0. Joe, I do appreciate your time, though, nonetheless. Thank you so much.
Richard, thanks so much for having me.
All right, everyone. When we come back, we're going to lighten things up, and we're going to take a look at, of all things, the Golden Globes and the industry it is celebrating or actually condemning. Why would the host of a show make a mockery of the very business they're all a part of?